One winter day, a man went shopping at the local neighborhood mall. When he returned to his car, he noticed a rather foul odor coming from under the hood, and so he checked the engine. In the compartment, he discovered a dead cat, rather mutilated from being caught in the fan belt. It was wintertime. The poor cat had sought shelter from the snow and cold and didn't realize the dangers of resting on the engine block. Mr. Jones was lucky enough that one of his shopping bags was made of plastic. And so he emptied its contents and proceeded to scrape, pull, and push the cat corpse into the bag. With a bang, he slammed the hood down and walked off to wash his hands. But looking back, he noticed something unusual. He had left the bag on the hood of the car. He was about to return and pick it up, but just then a lady walked by, looked suspiciously in both directions, and then grabbed the bag. With her cart, she sped off down into the mall. Well, this is too good to be true, the man thought as he laughed at the lady. He decided to follow her to see what would happen next. She went to a restaurant and proceeded to survey her price. Eek! She screamed as she looked in the bag, and then she fell over. Of course, the management was equally alarmed that a customer had fainted in their establishment, and so they called the paramedics. The woman, in no time at all, was strapped to a cart and ready to be hauled off to the ambulance. But the man could not resist. "Hey, lady," he shouted, "don't forget your package." And with that, he gently put the cat corpse-filled bag on the lady's chest, just as the ambulance doors were closing. One summer evening in Broken Bow, Nebraska, a weary truck driver pulled his rig into an all-night truck stop. He was tired and hungry. The waitress had just served 3 tough-looking, leather-jacketed motorcyclists of the Hells Angel type. And these 3 fellows who saw the truck driver decided to give him a hard time. Not only did they verbally abuse him, one grabbed his hamburger off his plate, another took a handful of his French fries, and the third picked up his coffee and began to drink it. Well, how did the truck driver respond? How would he respond? Or how would you respond? Well, this trucker did not respond as one might expect. Instead, he calmly rose, picked up his check, walked to the front of the room, put the check and his money on the register, and went out the door. The waitress followed him to put the money in the till and stood watching out the door as the big truck drove away into the night. When she returned, one of the cyclists said to her, "Well, he's not much of a man, is he?" She replied, "I don't know about that, but he sure isn't much of a truck driver. He just ran over 3 motorcycles on his way out of the parking lot." The farmer had been pestered by a carload of people who delighted in climbing an orchard fence and eating his apples without asking permission. One day, as he walked up to them, one of them smiled sheepishly and said, "We hope you don't mind that we took a few of your apples." "No, not at all," said the farmer. "And I hope you don't mind that I took some of the air out of your tires." What is the common theme in these 3 stories? Sweet revenge. Being able to retaliate when someone has done something they should not do. That brings us to our text in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 through 42. "You have heard that it was said, 'Eye for eye and tooth for tooth.' But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, Go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. This is a part of the Sermon on the Mount that is especially challenging to us, I think. Jesus begins by saying, you have heard. Eye for eye, it was said, eye for eye, and tooth for tooth. There are about 3 places in the Old Testament where this is mentioned. We'll look at 2 of them. Exodus chapter 21, verses 22 through 24. Now let's keep in mind that in Exodus 20 we have the 10 Commandments. In the next few chapters we have basically a civil law. Israel was a nation. They needed a law system to govern them. And so in the law of Moses you have moral regulations, yes, but you have things like what happens if some mold shows up on your wall. How do you handle diseases? All kinds of regulations. And so, here in Exodus 21, 22 through 24, we read these words. If people are fighting and hit a pregnant woman, and she gives birth prematurely, but there is no serious injury, the offender must be fined whatever the woman's husband demands and the court allows. But if there is serious injury, you are to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. If there is no serious injury, then there's a fine to be paid. If there is serious injury, here's a standard that is set. In the case of someone's eye being put out, the penalty for that could be putting out the eye of the offender, and so forth. Well, in Deuteronomy chapter 19, verses 16 through 21, we have some similar instructions to judges. If a malicious witness takes the stand to accuse someone of a crime, the 2 people involved in the dispute must stand in the presence of the Lord before the priests and the judges who are in office at the time. The judges must make a thorough investigation, and if the witness proves to be a liar, giving false testimony against a fellow Israelite, then do to the false witness as that witness intended to do to the other party. You must purge the evil from among you. The rest of the people will hear of this and be afraid, and never again will such an evil thing be done among you. Show no pity. Life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. What we see in the law of Moses, and what Jesus is referring to here, we see a law code. This is the legal system. And these penalties are to be determined before judges. This is not a personal thing going on. But if someone wrongs you, you take it to the leaders and to the judges at the time. You make your case. If the person is found to be guilty, the penalty will equal what was done to you. We notice that if somebody put out your eye, the penalty was not for both of their eyes to be put out. It was eye for eye, tooth for tooth, and so forth. The law of Moses was restrictive to prohibit unlimited vengeance. Now, by the time of Jesus, money payments for damages were allowed. And so sometimes, if there was a personal injury, if the injured party agreed, they could just be paid money rather than the eye for the eye thing. The original law was a fair one. It kept people from forcing the offender to pay a greater price than the offense delivered. It also prevented people from taking personal revenge. Now, we come to Jesus' day. The Pharisees apparently used this instruction to justify personal revenge. They took it out of the law courts where it belonged and applied it to personal relationships where it did not. So on the one hand, Jesus says, you have heard, and he gives a statement that will remind them of the law. Jesus says, but I tell you. And Jesus gives several examples of how they are to behave. Is there still a situation in the mind of Jesus for legal recourse if you were wronged? I think we would say yes. He believed in law and order. We see that throughout Scripture, and especially the New Testament. Parents, as we saw this morning, are to require obedience from their children. Society works better when that happens. In our law courts, we defend those who have been wronged. If someone takes a life, if they murder someone, there is a penalty for that. Some of us have cringed at the lawlessness we've seen in the last few weeks. It's not the first time that's happened. Every once in a while, when the situation, the opportunity arises, some people say, it's time to go shopping. If the door's not open, you break the glass, you go in and you take your stuff out. Well, that kind of lawlessness has to be dealt with, or you have big problems. However, what is Jesus talking about? He's talking about our personal relationships.